Yeah, so this should be quite interesting. It's aged 10 years, so it should be quite smooth. And it's cask strength. And
that is what they use to ensnare you, to make sure that you think it's special. It's just beer. You just want to get high, you know?
Yes, this is what a Philistine would say, that it's just beer. It's not beer, it's whiskey.
It's just beer. I want to get high. I'm sure the guys who drink, say, Scud, they're just not sophisticated, but I'm sure if one of them gets inspired, they also tell you of so many flavors that are in Marseille saying, but look, you just want to get high.
Well, yeah, the end result is the same. So a little bit of housekeeping. We know that we've got a lot of new audiences that are interested in this particular series, so we thought it best we just do a bit of our housekeeping so that people actually understand how we go about it. So with Chris Mutswango, Comrade Chris Mutswango, that was a no-hold-barred conversation. So when it's a no-hold-barred conversation, we do a bit of sparring and we push back quite a bit because we're trying to get as much as we can in a short period of time. And then when we have, like what we're having with Comrade Saviour Kasukuwere, we call that a rabbit hole. And typically what happens with a rabbit hole are those that have watched us over the last 3 years know that this is where we really stretch any argument or whatever, and we allow the guest to speak a lot more because we actually trying to get a bit of depth. And so no hold bars is where we get an understanding, and then when we want to go deeper, then we have a rabbit hole session, which is what we are going to have. So to kick this off, could you tell us, Comrade Saviour Kasukuwere, could you tell us your thoughts as you had the interview with Chris Mutswango? When you had the interview, the first time you had it, what was going through your head and what were your immediate thoughts?
I said, what a lot of rubbish.
Oh, short and sweet. Okay.
I mean, straight to the point, when I saw it, I just said, you know what, I think this nonsense deserves a response. We've got to put the record straight. There is a point at which you allow an individual to lie, but you also get to a stage where you say, you know what, let's put the record straight. Because Christians to get carried away in his narcissistic manner and fashion. He wants to portray himself as the Rambo struggle for independence, the Rambo in the economy of Zimbabwe, and he's the only one who's correct. Everybody else is wrong.
Okay, so that's where we're going to start. So he says in that interview, he says, your response to CITIC that had come to Zimbabwe. And for background information, CITIC is one of the largest conglomerates in the world, certainly the largest in China. And they were trying to do a mega deal in 2015 in Zimbabwe. And when he brought them to cabinet and to Zimbabwe, he says your response was, this is where Zimbabwe is. That is the accusation, he alleges for you and Joao. That's what you say in stopping CITIC to actually invest in Zimbabwe. Would you like to give us your side of events and what actually transpired?
Well, thank you very much. And indeed, I think this is why I sought this intervention to put the record straight. So Chris was our ambassador in China. And obviously he had an unceremonious exit from China. You will recall in the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, he had to issue a statement correcting an impression he had made that China had granted Zimbabwe upwards of $4 billion, and this forced the Chinese government to deny that. And this was right at the tail end of his service as ambassador to China. We move forward, fast forward. He comes back to Zim after the 2014 internal squabbles in the party. Chris was made Minister of War Veterans. He sit within the cabinet. I must say, there's a colleague of mine who used to sit next to me, who always used to say, for how long am I going to enjoy this pain, this combat? Because he would speak not without an end. Each time the president was about to leave the room, he would engage him for another 1 hour, and he would have to wait or standing up for Chris to finish his stories. However, when Chris comes back to the country and into cabinet, we have these good discussions about the direction of the economy, about the direction of how we must build our economy and get Zimbabwe working. I must make it clear from the outset that from 2014 going onwards, is 2015, our cabinet was now no longer focusing on the governance issues to say how do we get the economy to work, because underlying the politics of the day was the succession issue. So it was more now like the Vice President then, Mnangagwa, and the team of his supporters who were in cabinet were now finding ways of scoring points to advance his political interests. Chris was one of those big running dogs that we had to deal with. So this cabinet meeting, which is held in September 2015, I'm sure if I'm not mistaken, around the 14th or thereabouts, we are told that there is a special presentation to be made. And we find this gentleman from CITIC. He walks in, and the president introduces him. He says, CITIC has been with us for the past 2 weeks. They've been consulting various departments, but he's come to make a presentation. The gentleman makes his presentation, and it had 3 aspects of it, of that presentation. There was the economic presentation, social-cultural presentation, but the most touching one was the political presentation. So in all that CITIC did was to try and posit Zimbabwe vis-a-vis the experience in China, and clearly from our judgment and what we discern from his presentation, it was the Mao and Deng era, the Mugabe, and a new Deng was coming to run the country. So CITIC, whilst it's a very big company, had been brought into cabinet, putting forward an economic agenda, but masking a political agenda. And this is what got us kind of like disconcerted right at the end, because when he then started making the comparisons to say this kind of an economy needs a new set of hands, and he's saying that in front of President Mugabe, he's saying that in front of cabinet. He went on and on and on and on. He spoke about how they were prepared to make investments into the country, and to the contrary, even up to now, they've not come back to make any one investment. However, when he finished his presentation, I lifted my hand and I thanked the president for recognizing me and asked that if we could ask this gentleman to excuse us so that at least we can debate his presentation, because we realized that if we're going to debate in his presence, it was not going to be nice at all, because we're going to be very brutal. Because, by the way, cabinet is a room for brutally honest men and women. If you're in cabinet, you're not going to be sitting there accepting the country to go into a ditch because you can't say your views. You've got to stand up and be a wise counselor to the president. And this is what the Constitution behoves on each and every cabinet member. You've got to take an oath of office. And in there, it is stated that you are going to render counsel and advice to the president, best of your ability. So we asked for this man to excuse us, and he excused us. And immediately the president said, well, the presentation that has been made is a very serious presentation with lots of implications. However, I will be leaving for the United Nations. I remember he was going, this is September, he was going for the UN General Assembly. And can we not defer this item to when I am back? We immediately all complied and said, yes, Your Excellency, we agree with this position. So the man was excused, and President Mugabe also thanked the man for his presentation, and he walked out of the cabinet room. And we had to reconvene now, this early October, when the president came back from at the UN General Assembly in New York. And again, he said, well, comrades, come, thank you very much. We now need to resume the discussion, the debate, the presentation by the Chinese CITIC guy. Oh, we went into it immediately. We asked it. Mchangwa had made the mistake of telling us that, in fact, Mchangwa said he is a professional agent. He is a professional consultant. He stands as somebody who consults businesses. And we then said, Mr. President, what type of cabinet minister are we having in this room? Somebody who is supposed to defend the interests of Zimbabweans, but on the other hand, he is wearing a hat of being an agent of another power, another sovereign, trying to sit in the cabinet of another sovereign. We tore into Mchangwa, we tore into the Chinese presentation. One of the things that was very interesting, for instance, in my area of responsibility, I was Minister then of Local Government, and I asked it, who has consulted, or where are the city guys getting the authority to say that they'll be responsible for the development of the whole new city? They had been allocated all these contracts behind our back. And obviously, I think this was done with Mnangagwa's concurrence. And we said, no, we can't have that. Who has discussed, who has agreed with them on what parameters? So Chris just can't come with CITIC to us and the fait accompli situation, say to us, this is what CITIC is going to do. So we discussed thoroughly the debate by the presentation by the Chinese man, and we basically found it to be a very, very disconcerting presentation, a very rude presentation, a presentation that was not sustainable in any way. In terms of, did he have the money? No. He just came to give us a political lecture. And we said we can't be told how to run a country. Just because China has succeeded, it doesn't follow, therefore, that we must not do everything what that China tells us to do.
Okay,
so we say to...
two things. Are you alleging that the Chinese were involved in some level of regime change, that they were coming into cabinet to sway the political...
Yes, the discussion made by that fellow pointed to a very, very disturbing interference in the political affairs of our country.
Okay, and then the second question is, obviously CITIC brought about 40 investment experts, and they were in town for a 2-3 week period. They met different ministers, they met Chinamasa, and they were looking at the roads infrastructure, building new cities, and a whole lot. And I assume that we do have a very strong state that would have done its background check on CITIC and on these investment professionals. So, and I'm sure that Mugabe would have received a report as far as, just how authentic these individuals are. So, based on that, why would you raise a political issue when clearly these were people that were coming in to help Zimbabwe?
I think I raised this matter that after the 2014 Congress of the party, activities of government, the ministers were kind of now, they were the pro-Mnangagwa ministers. There were those ministers who were supporting President Mugabe, who were saying we're here to work. And when these people came, I don't think there was proper clearance. There was no proper consultation. All we had was that they were working with the Chief Secretary, Dr. Sibanda, who also happens to be Iggy's brother. So they were in there. And because the Vice President obviously was pushing for this arrangement with Chris and so forth, it would have, it was a lot easier, I'm sure, for them to find them in our cabinet. And I don't know what Bonongo had done in terms of security clearance for these people, but what disturbed us was what they said when they were now making their presentation to us. But as we fast forward our discussion, and I'll say to you here, they were in our country 2015. Can you show me what CITIC has since done assuming that we are the ones who were responsible for blocking them. Okay, 7 years ago, ED and company took over power in the country. What have these CITIC people done? What has Mtwangwa and company done? Have they built anything beyond the statue along Samora Machel? We want, just show me a building which they say, this is what we did with CITIC, this is what we did, because some of the projects we are talking about, like the planning for parliament, that had been done a long time ago. When Chombo was Minister of Local Government, I then went to China, agreed with the Chinese, brought the concept of what they wanted to build, and presented to cabinet, and the Parliament of Zimbabwe was built. That we did. So I would love to know what is CITIC done. The 40 experts who were in our cabinet or who were in our government then, having achieved the political objectives that were then achieved by the current regime, can they show us what they have been able to do with CITIC? I'm sure Mtwangwa would have told you what CITIC has been able to do thereafter.
Well, I think the Chinese have been involved in Wangia 7 and 8 and other investments, but notwithstanding, you do make
Wangia 7 and 8 was a done deal before Mnangagwa became president. That had been agreed to. 7 and 8, we had agreed on that deal, and the companies were chosen. I think Mavaire was then Minister of Energy. He pushed hard on that 7 and 8 with the Chinese. And when President Mugabe went to his state visit in China in 2015, that was also agreed to. So that's not a CITIC issue.
Okay. There's another question that arises. So you were accused of being ambitious, which in our humble opinion, we don't think that's a problem. But could you help us understand how cabinet and government manages all the different competing desires and designs while managing investments from abroad? So let's say we want 7 and 8 and we invite the Chinese. How do you go about it? Because 7 and 8, it's a very costly exercise. And it turns out we can't even privatize it because no one will buy it because it was too much. We don't know who actually was engaged as far as making that deal possible.
Well, ordinarily, the 7 and 8 were government-to-government arrangements that were supported and financed, or to the extent possible, financed by the Chinese Exim Bank. So the government will give a guarantee because of the nature of this infrastructure we're talking about. This was a power project, and the country or the government will be seeing fit that we provide adequate power. We know that from 1 to 6, we were now having some stop and go. We were having difficulties. The machinery was aging, so we needed to ensure that we increase our energy. And hence, we'd also done the Kariba project, which was basically an extension of Kariba to the tune of about $300 to $400 million. And then 6 and 7, we also meant to increase our generation capacity at Wange. A couple of things worried us, obviously. That is the resource. We needed more coal, and some of the coal had now been allocated to Rudenberg and so forth. NEMA had put his foot down to try and stop the allocation of some of the land, which are quite fragile and where we have a lot of our national animals in the Wange National Park. However, that's a matter for another day. But coming to this one, the processes in government is such that if that's why the blue book comes out. What is your budget? But what is contained in the Zim asset document? What did we see as the key enablers to get the economy to work? Issues of power, water, and so forth. So countries and some of the friendly nations will then say, look, we have looked at your priorities. We are keen to support you on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 areas. Then you say, fine. They've identified their enterprise that can do the work, and then say, okay, they will relate with our own institutions as well, and discussions are then agreed upon, and the deal signed and the implementation. Government through the Ministry of Finance will then provide the financial guarantees in the event of any default, say i.e. in this case by ZESA. But primarily that responsibility fell on the Ministry of Finance to ensure that the loans are expiring. There are also cases where we could also access concessional funding. There are also cases where the government would give us donations, like the Parliament of Zimbabwe, it was a donation. There are also cases where the government would come in and say, okay, we'll give you partly as a donation, but part of it you've got to pay back. This is quite a hybrid of structures that can be agreed to within the parties. But overall, the process would also have in turn, i.e., if Zimbabwe's economy was such that various other entities or countries could support us, barring the sanctions, we could have gone and tender and asked it for the best
Did you go through
company,
tender?
best offer. Sorry?
I was going to ask that, why are you going through this song and dance and you don't have experts within government? Yeah. Why doesn't it just go through tender?
No, ordinarily everything must go through tender. And it's actually a misnomer for you to use government resources, especially funds collected from the people, without the necessary transparency that is required. That constitutes abuse of office. It's unacceptable. And in this case, such national projects of that magnitude would have called for an international tender. Various interested parties would have shown their interest and they would have provided their own bids and proposals of what they can do. We then assemble our own team of consultants and advisors who will then also work with the government to ensure that we get the best deal for the country. At the end of the day, it's always about, is your procurement in keeping with the transparent process, best deal possible, a least cost, as well as is it going to be an efficient and reliable thing that we're doing. So we had all these kind of permutations to look at. But in this case, because of our peculiar situation there, where the country was unable to access funding beyond maybe China, Russia, and other countries, we couldn't engage with Western countries because of the conditions placed on the IMF, because of the sanctions. So we were kind of like in a corner. But that also gave room for serious malfeasance. And I've always noted that sanctions and corruption became twin brothers and twin sisters. These were the twin challenges we had to deal with. If you wanted the corrupt deal to go through, you say, no, we are being blocked because of sanctions. And equally the same, the sanctions will also not afford you the opportunity to source at a global scale. Hence, the Chinese who were kind of friendly, who could take a risk on our country, were prepared to come forward and support the construction, development of 6 and 7. But you have seen the discussion that have been showed ever since, some of the bottlenecks that have been had to be dealt with, Twange, 6 and 7. These are the examples of the things that we must always guard against going into the future.
Yeah, so the next question is around indigenization. But before we get into that, I just wanted to ask you your thoughts philosophically on these issues that we've been discussing, like, power generation at Hwange. I believe, and I suspect, some like-minded people also believe that one of the reasons why we have all these challenges is because we're trying to solve these issues via government instead of the private sector. Does it, where do you stand, philosophically in terms of the role of government versus the role of the private sector? I believe if all of these issues were being delegated to the private sector, we would have resolved them earlier, cheaper, more efficiently.
I think you're asking me for my personal view or personal ideological standing. My persuasion is a development state where there is a mixture of the state participating alongside the private sector. Let's look at the energy sector. This is a key enabler, just like the road infrastructure, water. You will very much be on good ground if the state can muscle enough power to lay on the ground, to build the energy required for the country, to put up the sufficient infrastructure for roads and so forth. But yes, the private sector has also a role to play, but the private sector at times is not motivated to do anything that does not yield profit to them. So they will also want to make a profit. But you should also have room, and this I've seen the past few years, that individual IPPs are coming on board and they're producing power which is being fed into the national grid. And that was opened up even during our time. Dr. Ndenge and others who were in charge of the Ministry of Energy opened up. So there is a room as always, but the key infrastructure should be the state playing a part. The state cannot fold its arms and simply say everything else must just be done by the private sector. The private sector must also support a national effort, because there is also an opportunity that normally occurs. A country comes forward, say China says to us, we are prepared to support you with concessional funding for you to develop and increase your power. That can't then be given to just an individual, because they'll say, this is coming from the state. So the nature of the donation, the nature of support would require that it is received by the state. And the state primarily has a key responsibility in creating an enabling environment. It's not just by saying we're open for business, but it goes beyond that and saying, when we collect taxes, the taxes we collect from the people must of necessity be used to build the necessary infrastructure. And let the private sector come and build on this backbone that is already there. But the taxation, unless you're going to stop taxing people, then I can say transfer it to the private sector. But if you are also going to be taxing the people of the country, it is expected that the state, therefore, should be an enabler, create the environment for more development, but also put in place the key infrastructure. And lastly, on that point, there are certain areas which will require investment, but will not immediately yield any benefit to a private sector company, i.e., look at the telecoms industry. You need to spread your networks across the country. But if you go to Econet and say, okay, just put a base station for social reasons in Mutoko, they will not find. But when you say, look, it's not feasible, it doesn't make sense, the numbers are not correct for us to be able to make money. So hence, you now have the universal fund, where you are collecting funds and you have to build some of these towers so that at least you get the signals beyond. And this again shows you that there is a role that the state must play in creating a level playing field, as well as supporting the private sector, and in turn the private sector also finding it profitable, because we don't want, therefore, to burden the private sector and disable them from making a decent profit and return on investment. But there is a huge room for the private sector, and I believe the private sector can play a massive role in road construction, and they can be, given a chance, like municipalities, all mutual of this country can play a role in road construction, given by bridge to Mutare, by bridge to Victoria Falls, and let them participate. And they will be getting money out of the tolls. But the agreement must be watertight. What becomes the challenge is that if the government continues to change, chop, cut, and are prevaricating in terms of the positions, that affects the private sector. But I think, and I've observed some of the countries, like South Africa, the Singapore and so forth, there is a mixture of government coming. The rail system, for instance, you need to create that backbone to move goods, to move the people. Yes, essentially, it's something that can be done by private companies, but if the government can be able to negotiate a good deal with the Saudis, a good deal with the Turkish government, to put up the rail system, like what Tanzania has just done from Dar es Salaam to Dodoma, let's do it.
So, Honorable, so given the competing interests that are there in a political organization, you have already alluded to it, that maybe there was that contestation even within cabinet during your time. Doesn't this developmental state that you are pushing for, sort of an enabler for more corrupt activities? Because whoever is going to be negotiating, there's a risk that with this competing interest, the point person that is negotiating for this transaction might possibly cut their own deals, or even if they don't, there's this mistrust, there's this the general competing interest. isn't there scope maybe for what Shumba is talking about here, that maybe there's need for, government, okay, you are on the front face of it, but trying to bring in private sector, whether to look at the pricing, because one of the issues that keeps coming up when look at number 7 and 8 is the issue of pricing, and that's why there's a view that maybe you won't be able to privatize, that pricing is good, may actually not be present in government, and given that government is not driven by a profit motive, I think someone can just push a project for social or even political reasons, even if it doesn't make sense financially. So isn't there scope, even where government is taking the lead, for government to be working with its private sector and say, you know what, this project that we're doing, we know those private players, come on board, help us with 1, 2, 3. I wanted to just get a view of why government, like even during your time, didn't have that mindset to say, let's work with the private sector. They'll provide this kind of service, and government is going to provide this kind of service. Even as financial advisors to the transactions, to say, okay, are you getting the right price, and what exactly kind of conversation you can possibly have with the Chinese counterpart in terms of the technical aspect, technical on the sense of the financing. I'm sure technical on the side of the engineering, you'd have the engineers, but from the financial side, maybe you'd need that technical expertise. Why government was not maybe operating from that standing point from your experience?
Well, I think you guys have a very important task, and I'm happy that we're having this kind of conversation to educate policymakers as well as the private sector. Let's be honest, the current government, or the Zimbabwean government up to our time in the land, was not doing everything. You have Econet, which built one of the largest networks in the country, and they've gone beyond that. So you can't sustain an argument that there was no need or there was no basis for the private sector to participate in the economy. They are in there. There are other areas where the government is also coming. But what we need to do is that at any given point, we need to be able to do the feasibility studies. Is this a profitable exercise? At the end of the day, how much is it supposed to change the lives of our people? Zimbabwe has millions and millions of unemployed young people, of which the state has a duty to come up with a good programs, plans, or projects that can end up absorbing our people. You have right now the Gwai-Shangani Dam, which is under construction. It started during our days. In fact, it started way before, which is meant to bring water all the way to Bulawayo, and if need be, even push it down all the way to South Africa. Now, that project cannot be given to the private sector because of the absorptive capacity. You will really have a big, big problem. But assuming you want to bring in the private sector, let's sit down with the funders. Let's sit down with advisors and say, as we build this pipeline, apart from the political desire just to win the election and say, no, I've brought water to Bulawayo, what is the economic rationale of bringing in the Zambezi Matavele Water Trust or the Gwai-Shangani Water Project to Bulawayo? We're going to open up, say, 6,000 hectares of land, 60,000 hectares of land. What is the deal going to entail? It means we're going to be producing this kind of crop. Who will come in? We're going to have institutions like ADA. We're going to grow maize for Saudi Arabia. We're going to grow beans for China. We're going to do this. There is a lot of thinking that must be involved and inculcated in our government. And let's see what role the private sector can play. What can Old Mutual do? What can NAPSA do? What can the government pension fund do? Various other players, can they take a stake? And companies who are built around exploiting this resource. Look at the triangle, Hippo Valley estates. The government came up with a desire to develop the sugar estates, water. They realized there was a huge water resource, the Runde River, now we have the Chokwe Mkosi and so forth. And they said, right, let's come up with a charter. There was a law that gave birth to the Hippo Valley. There's a whole law that was given, concessions that were given, to the private sector. And that is how you saw the Anglo-Americans in that entity, in those projects, and alongside the other and individual farmers. So there was nothing happening in Chile then. But it so happened that when they sat down to make a feasibility and a plan, and the need to identify that we can actually produce sugar, look at what it has brought. So you now have the state having met its own expectations, which is at the final analysis about taxation. The state must create a capacity within society, within the private sector, so that it can be assured of dividends at the end of the day. So as the people work, you charge them. As the companies make profit, you get your dividends, you get your taxes, and that is what you now use also to invest in various other areas of the economy. So as we said as government, a lot of good plans would come up, but like I've admitted, I think it was a lost decade. Political contestation was now way ahead of economic reality. The things that you could do within 40 years or within 10 years, we have missed those targets because of too much politics. The thing that affects Zimbabwe to this day is this excessive politicization of everything. So any deal that makes sense is viewed from a political point of view, i.e., there was a decision or there was a request by a company that wanted to produce power, a Chinese company that had come in. I think there was a partnership with one of Mpofu's companies, Macomo Resources, to produce about 600 megawatts, but it required a government guarantee. Oh, there was a big problem. In fact, Mpofu avoided cabinet on 2 occasions, sittings, because that matter was on the table, and again, there was serious disagreements. Others felt we were empowering individuals, and I remember Chris so angry about it that you cannot sign a government guarantees giving Mpofu $600 million immediately. So there are these competing personal interests that in the near future, I think one wants to see a government that is ahead of these pet issues that rise above and concentrates on creating an enabling environment for the private sector, but also get the state to play its part. Government can't sit by and watch things going out of hand, or let alone not being able to provide services, which is the why governments are formed. Governments are formed to provide services, to provide the infrastructure, to provide the environment, peace and security. That's why we collect funds using the exchequer. There's a whole act of finance that Mtuli signs, and that is part of Parliament. We should use those funds alongside the private sector to do more. But as long as there's political contestation, as long as there are disagreements, as long as time Iran, we all knew Colonel Mugabe was one day or the other going to leave. He was advanced. There is no two ways about that. And it became an opportunity for others who would then sabotage each and every program to say, let him fail, let it fail. And overnight, create also opportunities for them to assume the power. You recall each time Mugabe would fly on holiday outside the country, they would say he has died in Hong Kong. I think he died almost over 6-7 times. But each time we received him, not his body. And this is the nature of the politics that has dragged our country back. But I must say, there is a thing that must be addressed. What are the fears in the political elites in Zimbabwe that has made them continue to try and hold on to power? This is the issue that must be addressed. The rest will fall in place. There is no big problem. Our country can do wonders. We educated people with fantastic environment. We have the water, we have the soil, we have the people. And the human resource base is huge and able. A lot can be done. That will transform our people. But contestation for power, fear of what people did in the past is what is limiting Zimbabwe's growth and development.
Okay, so there's one issue you've raised on Econet. We know that Strive hasn't been to Zimbabwe for over 25 years, and this happened under Mugabe. And there's this utter disdain that Mugabe and the government of the day had for indigenous entrepreneurs. And we are trying to understand, why is there this mistrust and disdain for local business people in preference for these mbingas? We saw, during a period under Mugabe where...
I'm better bribe again.
But talk about Rama taxes that will go to civil service.
Your problem is when you get rich. Remember, I'm saying Madara, Maganda wanted, I'm not back. Okay, can I? I'm just direct. Motors got through us, no problem. Look, if you look at the black empowerment, per se, and by now, we must be excited that we have developed Strive. We have terrace of guys, I don't know how James and Kamban are doing. We have the state intervention there, net one. But going forward, what are all the other areas of endeavor? What are we doing? Who is our champion in the hotel industry? Who is our champion in the transport industry? Who is our champion in the energy sector? In other words, they must be sustaining the systematic development of our own entrepreneurs. Yesterday, you had Larure Zo, Matambana Zo, the late Cheche, and others, who were the key drivers of the motoring industry, the transportation passenger. This is all the way back from the Smith regime. And the Chidzivas of this world who came into the tobacco sector and were driving. You've got the Msaris of this world who were there. And there was an acceptance that the transfer of power cannot just be political. It also has to be economic. In other words, as you transfer the political authority, it should mean that their own people become key stakeholders and players in the economy. But if you don't have a godfather, you're in trouble. The godfather must be strong politically, and if you go against the godfather, look at Mawere. When his godfather went against him, he collapsed immediately. So these are the things that must be dealt with. How do we develop a system or a country where it's not about patronage, but it's about the policies that we enact to ensure that our own people becomes masters of their own destiny. They develop without having to cling on the cocktail of one political leader or the other. Most of the political business leaders in our country today are exposed. They are factionalized. And they'll be so scared that should another administration come, what will happen to my lodge? Because they have been given an opportunity, which ordinarily would be a fair opportunity for everybody. But because it's a closed arrangement, just get this and keep quiet. You then make it look like, a favor has been done. So at the end of the day, you have this huge load hanging over your shoulders because you think a favor has been done for you. Yet, what we need to do is to ensure that our laws give rise to black bankers, give rise to black miners, give rise on people in the cosmetic sector, manufacturing sector, transport sector, every field of endeavor. And I don't think the government hated black businesses per se. The question of Strive you're talking about, Strive had so many friends in the government, and I used to speak to Strive when I was in the cabinet every other day. I mean, we used to speak and discuss. I remember even Strive's business grew quite a lot during the 90s to 2000. Yes, why he stays outside the country, I'm sure that he can answer himself. It could be his own concerns, and I'm sure I can't go into why he's outside the country. But yes, there were attempts to block the emergence of Econet. He went to court, and the court ruled fair, and that's what happens. He's in place. Those kind of influence will always happen, but Strive stood this ground, and he got his license. So what we need to see, and I think this is what your generation and I would like to see, is the emergence of more stronger companies run by our people. We are not against foreigners, but we want to see the same facilitation that is done for foreigners being done for our own people. I see more often than not the president receiving this delegation coming from Dubai, this is coming from China. We also want him to meet as many people as is possible who are coming from Chipinge, who have ideas, who are coming from Torashanga, who have ideas. We must also have enough room for our own people. Let's support them to grow. So
Honorable.
Ndingas who have become emergent today, I will do my briber. Mambingacho, I'm going to beg the cash. Saka you wonder is that when we motor no rambe.
Honorable, I want to take you down memory lane. You know, I have vivid recollection of 2010 when you were Minister of Indigenization, and a lot of us in the capital markets at the time, were very unhappy with the indigenization pronouncements at the time, that made it mandatory for every business in our country to comply with this law, that it should have a majority shareholding of previously disadvantaged Zimbabweans. And it made it incredibly difficult to actually raise foreign capital to do deals. So before we get into the specifics of that particular time, I just want to, at a very high level, just maybe get a sense from you what the philosophy or the thinking around, indigenization, empowerment is in a country that was previously colonialized like Zimbabwe, where a certain ethnicity was over 100-year period or 90-year period in the case of Zimbabwe. It was treated, favorably at the expense of the majority of the population. So, I don't think there's a question that there was a material injustice. I don't think anybody can argue with the facts of history. But I think where we come in as economists and investment and finance analysts is, okay, fine. So we wake up in a post-colonial era. What's the best way to go forward? And, so you subscribe to the school of thought that actually the government must intervene and through its power and through the law correct historical injustices. Some of us have a different worldview, but before we get into, our side of the ledger, perhaps you can explain to us, what the philosophy is, what the thinking is behind the drive for the state intervening to ensure that the economy empowers indigenous people.
Thanks again. You and I have always wanted to have this chat. Many times you've spoken about indigenization, and I had no right of reply. But thank you for giving me an opportunity today. Let me take you backwards. When you are undoing a system, like the religious system, you have to undo it in three ways. There's the political side, there's the economic side, as well as the social and cultural. Colonialism affects these three. Colonialism brought in place a government that created a parliament that made laws to support an economic dispensation for their own people that ultimately affected the cultural norms of our people, because now we have to play tune. The tune of he who plays the piper plays the calls the tune, and largely serving the white imperial elites. Coming in 1980, what we do? We've got to reform the country. The politics is done. And white farmers and white businesses start laughing to us to say, by the way, we didn't realize that all we wanted was political power. If we'd done that, if we'd known that, there was no need for this protracted struggle for independence. We don't have lost people. And what does that give rise to? It makes our people a lot more wiser. The land reform comes in place. I'm mentioning the land reform as part and parcel of the political economy. But more importantly, to also say, as we craft the indigenization legislation, we are doing it immediately after the land reform program is happening. There is a lot of pain, there is a lot of gnashing of teeth, there is a lot of anger with Zimbabwe and everybody. So as you put pile up on top of the land reform program, we are talking about the transformation of the economy and saying that 51% of the resources of our country or the economic architecture must be in the hands of our people. I don't think that is anybody would like to argue with that. But more importantly, this legislation is brought to Parliament There were several ministers of indigenization that had been appointed before me. The late Babam Sipa, there was General Tongogara, General Tungamirai, there was Basha Mu, there was Mbenge, then Mangwana. I basically took over from Mangwana, who was Minister of Indigenization and Economic Empowerment. They prepared that protocol. Tribe Masiwa, Benin Cheche, John Mapondera, Chiangwa, Pamire, Joshua Nkomo's arguments that we need to transform the economy. And this was the war cry, the Nagamai, Mtasa, and so forth, that we must open up. That gave rise to a number of black banks coming up, and you recall the Mercurial Boca, who then set up the bank, Unibank, his own bank, and the time banks of this world. You had the NMBs and so forth. So there was a whole development of black entrepreneurs in the banking sector. But that was just part of it. Then there was this desire to say, what about the mining? Where are the assets? Where are the resources? I recall that there was a huge view put forward by one of Zimbabwe's miners. He was in Kwekwe. He was in the smelting industry. He used to talk about these areas and to say, we need our people to be involved in the mining sector. Albeit, even to this day, the Mines and Minerals Act of Zimbabwe is still the colonial one that was made by Ian Smith, drafted by the Ian Smith Parliament. To this day, we have failed to change that piece of legislation to make it one which is aspirational or supports the aspirations of our people. Now, this whole journey brings us now to the Indigenization Act 1433, which I inherited when I assumed office. That piece of legislation had already been passed. This was signed by President Mugabe. You recall there was an issue that he signed it just after promulgation or prologuing of Parliament. There was something technical about it. It nearly was going to fall foul of the law. But however, it was in place. And it made it clear that this is what we were aspiring for. And when I was appointed, I appointed a committee led by banker David Chapfika and others to then give effect to the law. So once you appoint a board, you then publish a statutory instrument which provides the guideline. But when you read it with the Act also enabled us to say, when you set up the committee or the board to run the Indigenization Act, you need also various sectorial committees that will then proffer their suggestions in terms of how each and every sector will be transformed. We want them to do that. We set up the motor industry, which was headed by Chingwena. We set up various, I remember, Rodziche, the mining industry, a sub-sectorial committee. Various committees were set up. And after that, those committees were also working hand in glove with the relevant ministries to agree on the thresholds, to say, how do we achieve the 51%? It was not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing, no. We aspired to achieve 51%. We said, when it comes to the resources, which is your diamonds, your gold, and so forth, there our 51% must come in play. But the rest of the sector, we agreed that we were going to, it was a deferred process, and the statutory instruments to that effect were published. However, because we had just completed in courts the land question, there was a lot of pain, there was a lot of anger, there was a lot of mourning in our country, and people felt this is going to be a death knell on our economy. But to be honest with you, Zengeni, not one company. If you can tell me one company which closed because of indigenization, I'll never defend it again. To the contrary, companies actually came to Zimbabwe. PPC increased. They actually developed a new plant in Harare. I can tell you here, if you read the article written by Stuart, who was the MD of Caledonia, Stuart Curtis, and the presentation he made, they indigenized the blanket mines. The communities are happy. They actually said, we have never been more settled than this. And to this day, that company is indigenized. Old Mutual, they also played their part in empowering their workers. So you tell me of a company that closed, just one company that closed because of indigenization.
Our time is up. We've already done an hour. Unbelievable. But we've got the next bit of people that we just want to go through in terms of just the economic review. But can you promise that you will spend a bit more time with us and we go down that particular rabbit hole of indigenization? You've raised a lot of things.
Please
We've got so many questions.
Bring to me one company that was closed because of indigenization, and I'll be very happy to engage with you again. I'm happy, I think, for us to continue this discussion because we need to deal with it. There was a lot of media stories that made indigenization look like, because of this, you can't go invest in Zimbabwe, you can do. Now, because it's not talking about 26% free carry. The agreements that we agreed with Zimplats was 10% free carry for the communities. Now we have related with 26%. I hope you will not turn around and say it's Kasukuwere who is the reason. They removed the indigenization from that.
Yeah, I think that's why. I think that's why I don't want us to. I want us to fully exhaust this issue, primarily given what's actually happening and the murmurs that we're hearing. So it's something that we would like to sit down and then have a proper conversation, and then also get into Mugabe and Mugabeism and a lot of things that happened during Mugabe's time. If he was such a brilliant man, why is it Zimbabwe is in the pits? So those are some of the questions that we will have with you. And I think that it's only proper that we give you enough time to prepare, because we will come prepared with all the evidence that you require. But thank you so much for this illuminating discussion. We've certainly learnt a lot. Tanzoti Mambinga Ndiano Badara. You know, doesn't mean to pay your taxes. But you know,
you see, you guys get rich. Minister Alpadiri, one out of a Benz, no one. Can't I deal it? That's right. But when I saw every day, what you go now, but she's go, what is
But I think they should be a nice and smart way of actually doing it, where if that is the thinking, right, it could be spelled out right at the onset. That 5% of total.
No, we're not going to get into that discussion.
No, because I'm
trying. The reasonable one. I'm going to be the reasonable one.
Okay, that's fine.
Yes, please shut Ranga down.
The conversation we shall have. Comrade, thank you so much. Have yourself a wonderful.
Thank you very much.
We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much. Cheers.
Your honesty.
Cheers, guys. Cheers. All the best.
Hopefully next time you'll be drinking something more interesting than water, Honorable.
I now have some biltong now. Do you have biltong there?
We have got a cheese board there, but it's coming for the second segment.
All right.
Enjoy.
Okay, cheers.
Okay, guys.
Cheers.
Well,
so are the other guys online?
That was a mouthful. Quite a lot for us to digest. I don't know what you guys think. Please, in the comment section. At this point in time, we looked at the algorithm and how it works. I would like you guys to just like. Please just click on the like button, and that will go a very long way in how the algorithm places us on YouTube. So,
and even subscribing.
Please subscribe as well, and share and let people hear a lot more. So what we're going to do is, we know that we've got a big audience that is joining us and that hasn't experienced the Friday Drinks way of doing things. What we say to you is, if it's your first time here, please welcome and enjoy. So what we're going to do now is just do a 2024 economic review. A lot has happened, and we just thought, you know what, let's get a group of people who can give us their synopsis and their understanding of what 2024 was like, and maybe what's going to happen in 2025. So 09, we've got the guys that have joined. So we have Rangamberi, I can see there. I can see Brains, I can see Butle, Janet, and then we're supposed to have Mutisi. Okay, all right. I suppose to just kick off, maybe let's start with Brains. Brains, would you like to just give us your view of 2024? What has it been like? What are your thoughts, and where are we as a country?
Sinashi, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, you can, loud and clear.
Yeah. So sorry, back to your question. What is here?
All right.
I thought you
give us your view.
Introduce me.
Okay, so give us your view. Yeah, you can. Everybody knows you. Brains Mchemwa is an economist in Zimbabwe. So give us your view.
I was just thinking.
Could you give us your view of the economic situation of Zimbabwe 2024? Okay, so Mtisi has joined us as well. So we'll give the floor to Brains, and maybe Brains, you can start. Just give us your view.
What are you drinking, Brains, before you get into the weeds?
Look, I'm smoking. I'm not drinking, so yeah.
What are you smoking,
I can
Brains?
actually
Something legal.
I can see some smoke just behind you, so yeah, you're not kidding.
Exactly. So I don't want to promote any brand here, but just know that I'm smoking something.
Okay.
Tinashi, 2024. It has been quite a difficult year, I guess, for the greater part of the year, in particular, when you look at what has been happening in the market from a liquidity perspective, even from a government revenue collection perspective, the interest rates have been quite high as well. The statutory reserves increased, the banks got a huge squeeze. So it's not been an easy year, more so compounded by the fact that we have a drought that has really ravaged the country, and that has really affected a lot in terms of the ability of this economy to conserve liquidity, because we've had to import a lot of maize. So yeah, that's my general overview of the economy. It's been a difficult year for business. We hope that 2024 is going to be a better year.
Same question, I will give it to Ranga. Ranga, please go ahead. Give us first your 3 minutes of your overview of the economic situation, 2024.
Sasta, before you do that, Mambo kwa samri zezita andiga. Good to see you, my guy. Good to see you.
Hi, Ranga, what are you drinking?
The world's finest drink. Mazoe.
Well done. You're in good company.
Yeah. So yeah, it's been one of those years, hasn't it? I remember back in January, we wrote an article just looking at what the year was going to look like, and it turns out it was actually worse than we thought, because number one, of the drought. And number two, which was a big deal as well, the commodity price crash. So you've got a situation where the government was waiting for this big boom in lithium, for example. They were waiting for this big pile of cash to come out of lithium. But it didn't happen. Lithium was selling at 80,000 a ton 2 years ago. Now they're down to 10,000 if you're lucky. So that's what's happened. And so a lot has happened this year, and we are hoping for better next year, like Brain said, but hey, it's hard to look at the outlook and see where the positives might come out of.
Okay, thank you very much for that short synopsis. Let's have Butle from a woman's perspective. Let's hear your thoughts. What was 2024 like? And also you can chime in as far as the budget is concerned. And what are your thoughts there? Just your quick 2-3 minutes.
Hi, I don't know, can you guys hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay, so I think from a woman's perspective, I think 2024 was more or less like what it was in the previous year. And I think we continued in that, it continued being in that space where we keep hoping that there'll be reprieve from the minister. We keep hoping that things will change, but they don't. At some point, we say, we don't really care about the budget. But of course we do, because, we keep having like a wish list. We wish we could have this, we could have that. Things don't change. So I think for many women, I speak for many, it was more or less like in previous years. I've listened to the gentleman giving us the statistics about, the price of lithium and stuff. I think for us, it's more about the everyday life, like in the home, to say how do you run a household and, with less and less disposable income. Because as you know, whether you are married or not, usually the household, it is the mother who does the budget. So I think from household level, it's becoming more and more difficult for us to run the household. Because I think the balancing, when we have fewer cents to work with, price increases in the shops, because I think at some point you could buy tomatoes like $1 for $6. I think right now you can find $1 for $3, $1 for $4, but even then they are smaller. So I think from us at that very basic household level, we do have less money to spend. And I think for us as well, the issue of ZESA, for me, it's been a very tough year, because now you don't know whether it's the fault or it's not shedding. It goes for 3-4 days, so what does that mean? It means whether I am the mother or I am the help in the house, because I have to run the household. It means I have to wake up maybe at 12 and iron the uniform. The kids have to go to school. For those who have young children, I'm lucky with men. But there are so many women with young children that still go to school. So that becomes a problem. And again, when we have less disposable income, it also affects our access to basic services like health, for example. And we know that our public health system is not really in good shape. But how many of us can afford to go to private doctors? So I think, generally it's been a very tough year for the women, particularly towards the end with the ZESA.
All right, thank you very much. And then we've got TC. Kudzi, tell us, your 2-3 minutes. Give us your overview of 2024 and your thoughts there.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you guys see me and hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay, awesome. I think 2024 was a terrible year for everyone across the board. For the ordinary person on the streets, I think there were 2 massive devaluations of the currency. In the early part of the year, the Zim dollar, as it was called, crashed, and it means people lost their savings, people lost value. Then the ZiG was introduced. A few months later, it also was massively devaluated. So people lost value twice during the year. This is in terms of the ordinary person on the streets. Then you go to government itself, in terms of revenue collection, they were also struggling. Their current policies, per se, they ended up affecting them in that formal businesses were struggling because of the monetary policy. And when formal businesses are struggling, the government is going to struggle and everyone in the economy is going to suffer. So it was a terrible year. But we can also, even though we can blame government policies and all that, there was a drought, which the colleagues have already mentioned. Terrible drought, which means the ordinary person does not have food on the table. The government has to provide assistance to some low-income households. That's a strain again on the fiscal side for the government. So it was really, really a bad year throughout for everyone, the government, business, and also ordinary people. It's even the diaspora themselves. People in the diaspora also suffered because they had to chip in to support the families back home. So it was quite a bad year for Zimbabweans.
Okay, thank you for that. So maybe let's go into the particular sectors. So I'll start with you, Brains. Let's talk about the informal sector and the formal businesses. We've seen huge tax and more regulation. What are your thoughts there? Will truly be able to, get his budget revenue from the informal sector? And is the informal sector surviving? Is it actually going to survive? What are your thoughts there? Brains, are you on mute? Okay, we seem to have lost them. Okay, so maybe Ranga, you can come in as far as the energy sector and the mining sector is concerned. What's actually been the performance, actual performance?
Yeah, I think Uche said it best. I think since 2019, I think the last I remember having no power for 12, 17 hours was possibly back in 2019. And again, it's not something that we don't know. We know the reasons. For 43 years, we haven't invested quite enough in energy. So this is catching up us. I'll give an example. Right now, the mining industry alone, it needs 2,500 megawatts of power. Right now, all the projects that are currently going on and the new ones. But the country as a whole is producing, when we're lucky, 1,100 megawatts. So already, even if we give the mines all the 2,500 megawatts that they want today, we're still not going to catch up with the actual demand in the country. So that's a lot to do really with our failure to invest in energy. So it's been very difficult. So the only green light that we're seeing, as it were, is some of the solar projects that have come through. Mines have had to take up the mantle, as it were, and build their own solar plants. We've seen guys like Central Gate putting up 25 megawatts here, 5 megawatts in Tirikwi, which is all great news. In fact, we should be celebrating some of those guys. They are pulling miracles. I mean, in the environment where you don't know whether you're going to be paid in Zoom dollars or you're going to be paid in US dollars at a low tariff. So these guys have really done well. But is it enough? No, nowhere enough. I think we need the government itself to get itself in order and get as much investment as they possibly can in energy. So we can talk about growth and 6% growth, like Mtuli is saying, for next year, but it's hard to see that happening with 17-hour power cuts. I mean, how are you going to run a factory? How are you going to run even a clinic? How are you going to run a school? Right now, clinics are really depending on solar power donated by some of the governments that we rant about. So that's a bit of an embarrassment for us as a country. I think we just need to get ourselves in order in terms of energy.
Ranga, you're talking of blackouts, 17, 18-hour blackouts throughout the year, this year, primarily because of the drought and primarily because of our own problems at Hwange. The issue I want to raise is when you look at Mtuli's budget, it actually looks at electricity, and there's been a growth of about 3.1%, economic GDP growth in the energy sector. Where's that coming from? If we know that we're not even able to meet the 2,000 megawatts that we're supposed to be producing. So how do you reconcile what's actually happening on the ground and what Mtuli is actually saying?
Well, I would guess, my guess, Tinashe, is looking at the 600 megawatts that came on stream during the year. God knows what would have happened if we didn't have that 600 megawatts. I think we haven't said that story enough. That 600 megawatts have been our saving grace. Imagine if those hadn't come through, if Hwange hadn't come through with units 6 and 7, where we would be in terms of energy, we would be 600 less. So right now we're producing, let's say, around 400 megawatts, which isn't enough to power all our cities. So I think I would imagine that's where is looking at the growth in terms of output. But again, it's not about the output; it's about where the demand is versus what we're actually producing.
Okay, and as far as mining is concerned, I mean, gold production, we're expecting about 35 tons. That's one of the highest that we've had in the last, 7 years or so. I think the last was in 2018 where we had such, gold output. Isn't that, something to celebrate?
Yeah, well, yes, it is. By November, our gold mines at 32 tons. Last year, over the same period, we were at 30 tons. So it's very possible that we're going to get to the target of 35 tons by the end of December. So again, it's one of the better stories of the year. We've seen Caledonia, who operate Blanket Mine, coming through with a lot more production. We've seen Dalaglio doing the same. We've seen companies like Bulawayo Mining Company, for example, who have really come through this year with more production and more processing capacity. So that's one of the better stories in the mining sector. The problem always is there that you look at the production and say, okay, 32 tons is really good, but we really should be around 60 if you really think about it with the capacity that we have in our mining sector. We have a lot of idle mines that really need investment. So I think that's where the government should be really focused at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much. Bootle, let's speak to the budget and women issues, because I think that's a particular pain point for you. And let's speak to it. What are the issues that you think needed to be addressed and weren't actually addressed?
Thank you so much. I think for me, the first issue is to just point out that I don't think that the budget was pro-poor. I think when the minister was first appointed, he kept on talking about, pro-poor budget. In my view, it is not. Maybe economists will think it is, but I don't think so. Because I think what's happening is the minister keeps introducing more and more taxes, but these are not translating to better access to services, for example. Yeah? Because I would imagine that if I'm paying taxes, and I think this is what used to happen in the 80s, because I grew up in the 80s, right? I think our parents used to pay taxes, and that meant that, if I was at school, I got injured, I could just go with my friends to the local clinic. I didn't go to Mpilo. Mpilo is a referral hospital like Pari, right? So I would just go to the local clinic, get treated, if I needed to dressing out, I would go there, because then I remember they'll talk about paying. It was, I think, some sort of rate, because sometimes if you didn't pay, they would, I think City Council would recover that money somehow when your parents paid rate. It was like the card, the housing card, I don't know what they used to call it, but something like that. So that system used to work with a very functional primary health care system. Now it's not so much, I don't want to say dysfunctional, but I think maybe it's near dysfunctional. Because what we have now is a situation where anybody with even a minor ailment, everybody is going from Mpilo, everybody is going to Parirenya. And what does that mean? It means the nurse, and we will blame them because we are patients who want service. But that nurse is overwhelmed because she's now having to look after, more patients than she's actually supposed to, right? And then at the same time, she's grossly underpaid, right? But then she's got a long queue of people that she has to look after. And in my view, when we listen to the minister presenting the budget, it doesn't look like government acknowledges that there is a problem in the health sector. I mean, he can say something, I think it's nice. He can throw words here and there, but those words don't really translate to anything tangible. I can give you an example. I think our budget, would never reach the 15%. That is that the government agreed with other governments that put a declaration. Other than that, I think the funding that is going towards health is actually, diminishing, right? I don't have the specific figures, but I know definitely the investment in the health sector has gone down. And for me as a woman, it's particularly annoying, I think, from government, because here you are taking more and more taxes, you are taking more money from our pockets, but we still don't get the service. Like I said, for me, that is a major problem. But the government is taking money from us, but we are not really seeing the results. I can give you an example. For example, I was talking to the director of Community Working Group on Health, Mr. Rusik, and he was telling me that I asked him about village health workers. The village health workers are very important in the rural area because they then are like the bridge between, the big, sort of like what you can call maybe the big mainstream health sector and the communities. Because these are communities that are like far away from the big hospitals, far away from the clinics. So village health workers play a very critical role. It tells me that in the past 2 years, because the funding for the village health workers comes from the Global Fund, used to come also from the Health Development Fund and government. But unfortunately, like in all other cases, again, which is I think it's an indictment on our government. Government doesn't come to the party with its contribution. So what we have now, I think the Health Development Fund, I think, finished 2 years ago. So it's now just the Global Fund that is funding village health workers. So these women are getting $15 a month. That is what they're getting. It's like a, stipend, $15 a month. They're in the rural areas. Apparently the uniforms, the bicycles that they use, all come from the Global Fund. Our government hasn't come through. And I'm saying, why is the government not coming to the party? Yeah, and it's a particular concern for us as women because, those village health workers, particularly, for women, because women might not have access to, like something as simple as family planning tablet. I mean, if I'm in Harare here, I can go to any clinic. But these are women maybe who stay 20, 30 kilometers away from the nearest health facility. So the village health workers are actually playing a critical role. But they've also, they're getting like $15 a month, what do you buy? And then actually they remove $1 for admin fee. So you're left with $14. So this means that there are more and more women and children who are not able to access health facilities in the road. So it's a very big concern for us because we are saying if government is taking money from us, why is it that they're not investing in social services? It's a very big issue for us.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I think it's loud and clear. The health sector is a pain point and the budget hasn't been able to address that. So Kuzi, I've got a question for you, and I think you highlighted the two devaluations that happened during the year, beginning of the year, when it was ZWL, as well as in just after the middle of the year, I think in September, when we then had a ZIG devaluation. And, if you add those two, you're looking at close to 90% of value lost in a year in just one currency. But when we look at the inflows, as far as the inflows are concerned, we're now breaching, closer to 12 billion US dollars coming into the country. What is the problem? Why would we suffer so much in terms of devaluations when we're actually increasing the amount, coming into the country?
Okay, thank you for that question. I think Buhle has highlighted something here. We have a budget, but if the budget is just numbers. It's just numbers that the Minister of Finance can just say. In the end, it's about the allocations and the revenue collections. How much is he collecting and how much is he allocating to who? These devaluations, they were also affecting the government itself in terms of that revenue they were collecting in local currency. Obviously, it also lost value along the chain. And because of that, they cannot fund the social services for the ordinary person. The problem that we have is the political elites will never cut their own, they will never cut their own luxuries. So if they have to get a car, they will still have to get a car during the year. If they have to get a bonus, they will still get the bonus. It's now the person in the village who is going to feel the brunt of that. But this devaluation, as you pointed out, I think it's because of the market distortion. It doesn't really matter how much a US dollar is coming in, Forex is coming into the country. What matters is how much of it is available on the Forex market. See, so demand is there on the Forex market, but the supply is not there. There is no supply because if Buhle receives $500, for example, there is no incentive to sell it on the Forex market. Why? Because you can simply go to a shop and buy with that currency. So as long as we have the multi-currency system, there is not going to be much stability in the local currency because there is always going to be a mismatch in terms of the supply of Forex currency, a foreign currency, and also the demand. Because everyone in Zimbabwe who has got a local currency wants to change it to Forex. So there's always a demand for foreign currency. But the people who have got the foreign currency, they have no incentive to sell it to anyone. So the supply now there's going to be, I will call it an artificial shortage on the market. So it doesn't matter how much forex is coming in the country, the market is not balanced. That's my view. It's not a useful market per se. It's not balanced in terms of demand and supply.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Janet has joined us, and Janet is a guru on debt. And let's talk about that, because we saw our national debt increasing, both local as well as foreign debt. I think now it's close to $21 billion US. Would you like to speak to that, Janet? What's actually been happening as far as the debt is concerned in 2024?
Thank you so much, Tinashe, and hello, everyone. The issue really around debt is of concern. Probably to first as well appreciate that it's been good in terms of increased debt transparency that the minister has been sharing in terms of where our debt stands. We may have issues in terms of really is it exactly where it is, and coming, of course, from the debt justice movement, they are always push that let's do a proper debt audit to exactly know how much we owe. But at least we are always given something to work with. And we do have that something to work with, and that's the debt figures that the minister is always bringing together with the national budget. And it is a big issue and a big concern that our debt really shot up in 2024. We saw almost the figures that we have, they're ranging between 21 to 23 billion, and 85% of it being external debt, and that external debt being the arrears and penalties. And we know as well of the process that has gone on in 2024 in terms of the high-level debt dialogue process, which began in 2022, but to date has also not then unlocked a conversation around clearing those arrears, but also to have a framework for debt relief for Zimbabwe. And this is because of the various reforms within the three areas of governance, the land reform, and also the economic reforms that the government has to implement. So those probably have not really gone hand in hand in terms of what has got to happen. So we have a huge debt stock combined, both external and also domestic debt. 85% of that debt is actually in external debt, and about 15% is in domestic debt. And probably two key issues really in the budget is around the rollover of the treasury bills into the 2025 budget, but also the non-negotiable certificates for deposits, and how we have gotten government domestic bonds and other domestic instruments that the government is using for the domestic debt market. And this really creates huge challenges in terms of the accumulated arrears to international financial institutions, which the current process has not managed to resolve. The limited access, of course, to new external funding that is concessionary remains, and we take it once again in the 2025 budget. And the need for debt restructuring or clearance strategy really to rethink and say how are we going to move forward since the previous high-level debt dialogue platforms that have been held, facilitated by the facilitators that we are aware of. I think that process, we need to really review it and say how are we going to move going forward so that we get a resolution from this aspect. But on the domestic debt pressures, which I think is really of major concern, and we have been raising it from the debt justice movement, it's around the treasury bills rollover risk, and a large volume of them maturing in 2025. And what does that mean in terms of limiting domestic investor base? The issue around refinancing, the high refinancing costs that are expected, and also the risk of the domestic debt spiral. I think because we also don't have the external debt lines, it means we will rely quite a lot on the domestic market, and this is a big issue. And then on the non-negotiable certificate of deposits, I think it's also a major concern that we need to highlight as we look into the 2025 fiscal year, in terms of the significant redemptions that are due in 2025 in that respect. and how that is going to really constrain the fiscal space for that redemption, and also the potential impact that has on the RBZ balance sheet. We know that the government has significantly assumed some of the debts from the RBZ so that it can really focus on its core mandate of being the central bank. But now, with this, I think there is that potential for it to really impact on the RBZ debt balance sheet, and a conversation, a really big conversation, local Zimbabwean conversation is needed when it comes to the debt resolution that we need. And I'm sure colleagues on the panel have also shared in terms of how this impacts the whole economy. And it's a big elephant in the room when we really look at the debt question. And what we really relied on in terms of bringing together the data with the Zimbabwean government and the creditors, that platform or process of initiated in 2022 does not seem to be going anywhere. So what is it that we are going to do in 2025 is a big question that we have and that we need to take forward.
Janet, could you speak to parastatal debt as well? Because, there's a huge debt. So when you look at Wange, we're operating losses. There's a debt that we're picking up there. There's ESIM debt. There's debt in a number of these parastatals that perhaps is not being accounted for in our national statistics, but it's somewhat affecting us. GMB subsidies, those sort of things. Could you just give us a synopsis of what's actually happening there and if there's any light at the end of the tunnel?
So really part of really the debts that we have as well is the assumption from parastatals that are not performing. And I think there are many instruments that the government has tried to use in terms of bailing out such parastatal for the move for assumption of debts. We have had, for example, the Zamaco before, the non-performing loans facility where they were being put in there and all that. So that remains really a key and critical issue for us to have a conversation about. And I think, like you are saying, Tinashe, we really have an issue in ascertaining in terms of what is the exact debt when it comes to parastatals, which is why probably there is the push that we are talking about in terms of a debt audit for us to really know which parastatal is owing what, and is it a publicly guaranteed debt? Because there's also that conversation that how then does the government publicly guarantee such debts? It's also from those parastatals, but also from the private sector. We saw after COVID that the government also publicly guaranteed quite a number of debts to ensure that the private sector, especially hospitality, could once again rebound after the COVID-19. But I think it's a big conversation that has contributed to part of the legacy debts. When we're talking about the legacy debts that we talk about in Zimbabwe, part of it really is around those parastatals, some of them that are not functioning anymore. We had at one point debt, for example, from this was still as an example, where it was even to do with the human resources. We are saying, how do we clean their balance that we can get new investors that can come and sponsor and we begin to have industry functioning. So it's a big as well elephant in the room in terms of the parastatals debts. But there are also parastatals that also give services. For example, yes, I think those are some of them that we'll be looking at and saying, what is it that we have to do? And I think difficult conversations have always come from there. Do we commercialize? Do we privatize? Where do we go when it comes to the issue of parastatals? But I think the issue of legacy debts within those and how that impacts on the debt stock is a big issue that needs debt instruments that would address that. But those debt instruments, they have the potential to constrain, like we have said, the fiscal base, but also to make the debt balloon even further. So it's a big conversation. It's something that we need probably an engagement with the Public Debt Management Office in terms of ascertaining exactly the parastatals debt, the publicly guaranteed debts as they stand as well coming from that sector, and saying how do we move forward and how does the government alleviate that debt problem and ensure that, but with ensuring that it's not also making the debt really shoot up the roof in terms of what we already owe in our domestic debt portfolio. I think it's a big issue. It's a conversation as well for 2025, I guess, as we move forward in terms of enhancing the performance of those parastatals and say, how do we move forward?
Okay, thank you. So last questions around the panel. So I'll start with Ranga. Ranga, we saw retrenchments in the mining sector. So I think Zimplats and other mining companies, Rio Tinto, I think, there are serious challenges there. Would you like to speak to where are we as far as the mining sector, and what sort of performance do you think we're going to get into 2025?
Well, yeah, thanks, Tinashe. I think it's a bit of a difficult one because most of the forecast right now for gold, for example, gold was really having a really good year in 2023 until Donald Trump decided to come back into power. And then the gold prices have started coming off quite a bit from their record highs. So gold was really firing high, and so gold mines really did well. They didn't retrench. On the other hand, you had your platinum and your lithium mines retrenching. For example, we saw platinum, Zimplats. They had a loss. I mean, it was rare to hear the word Zimplats and loss. There was Zimplats and loss in the same sentence, but they did have a loss last year at the end of the previous year. So they had to put on hold a lot of projects. And the ripple effect is that your suppliers also have employees, and they also have to retrench down the chain. It's also happened to the lithium guys. I know the guys at Bikita, for example, have stopped one of their new plants. So that means all the suppliers also send their own people home. So it really depends on what happens on the global markets. There are a lot of things that are really out of our control as price takers in the industry. So there's a lot of water to still go under the bridge. We don't know how the lithium price is going to pan out next year, because it depends on who you speak to. Or one house will say that, it's going to come back up. Even some of the lithium people are saying that the price has reached a bottom. But are we going to get as much investment as we did in 2022? I doubt that very much. So I think for our government, the big task, in my opinion, is really to focus on two things: diversifying the industry and focusing on energy. There are a lot of energy companies now who are really, really willing to come into Zim and produce power. What they've been given the last year is guarantees that we're going to give you a workable tariff. We're going to give you 9 cents a kilowatt hour so you can get your projects off the ground. I think that's where our government needs to focus on, because you can talk about diversifying away from commodities, which are really unpredictable at the moment. But then you can't diversify into your industry if you don't have the energy to do that. And you can't diversify if your people are running away from the country at the rate they are at the moment. So I think that's where the government needs to focus on. So I think if that happens, I think we do have a chance at a turnaround. But it's not going to happen all of this on. It's going to take a lot of work.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you to read your tea leaves. Do you think that in the mining sector we've seen the worst of the carnage, and perhaps we might see some sort of stability, and or Donald Trump will just ensure that the gold price go even lower, and lithium prices, drill baby drill, so that's good as far as oil is concerned. But I don't know what's going to happen with lithium and gold and everything else. But yeah, let's hear let's hear what you think.
Well, like I said, when we started Tinashe, in January this year, we predicted that things are going to get bad, and things didn't get bad; they turned out worse. So I'd rather not. But I think there are a lot of exciting projects in the mining sector. For example, we've got the Cairo Platinum project that's really been delayed by the platinum price crash. I mean, they are putting in 391 million into that project. If that comes out, well, that's jobs for our people. There are a lot of nice projects that we're watching as well in the energy space that we think will get off. We'll start working in 2025. We'll be watching those. So I think there is some excitement also in construction. It has slowed down the last quarter, but I think there's still a lot of room there to grow in agriculture as well. I think hard as it might be with the drought that's going on, I think in terms of horticulture, for example, we're seeing a lot of growth, seeing a lot of new names coming in. So yeah, I don't want to say I'm optimistic, but look, optimism is as optimism goes in Zimbabwe. I think a lot of industries will thrive, but it's really where how widespread that thriving, if you want to call it, can be in Zimbabwe more.
All right, thank you very much, Ranga. Utle, maybe let's hear your thoughts and views. What do you think is going to happen in 2025? What should we be worried about, and what should we be excited about?
I'm not sure whether we have much to be excited about, but I mean, we are Zimbabweans. We are known for saying at least. So maybe, we say at least we are still alive. At least we are still, able to eat 1 or 2 meals, whatever that means. But I think really for me, I'm glad Janet talked about conversations. So I think one of the conversations that we need to be having as a country is really around accountability and transparency and accountability. Because as I'm sitting here, I'm very annoyed, I am angry, I am livid, any word you can think of. Because, like, in my view, the minister is no longer the Minister of Finance, really. He's now the Minister of Taxes. Because he keeps taking, cents from our pockets. And I think there's a misconception where I see a lot of the times on social media. People say, but in Mazimba, you don't pay tax. But we do. Because there's value-added tax. If I buy bread, I'm paying that. At the same level with a man who makes $5,000 a month and I only make $100, I'm being taxed. If I want to go and get treated at the clinic, I pay $5. That money that they say marry a card. Those are fees. Those are service fees. I think even when you apply for a passport for 53 bucks, the 3 bucks goes to government somehow. Think about even when you buy this, and there's a percentage that goes towards rural electrification. I would like to know, for example, within just the past 5 years, how much money has been raised through those, maybe even just electrification fund, how much money has been raised, and what has that money been used for? Because you can't keep on, you can't, Takwita my 18-hour power cut. So I don't know whether is the minister thinking of, or not minister personally, but I'm saying government, are they thinking of taking some of that money and investing in changing the fortunes in the energy sector? I don't know. So I think another big conversation we need to have as a country is around transparency and accountability. And again, on the energy sector, I don't know if people remember that in 2022, there was a report in the Standard that I think, many government officials had solar panels, what to alleviate the power problem. But what about us, the poor? What happened? So I think because then I think for me as a taxpayer, it becomes unfair. You as a minister, you keep taking money from our pockets, but we are not seeing that translate into service provision. And another thing, I think as a citizen of the country, of course, I'm not an economist, but I'm saying I think all of us in the panel may remember a time when the economy was a bit more functional. And I think when the economy is a bit more functional, all of us have got a role to play. All of us want to participate meaningfully and contribute to the growth of the economy. But how do I do that in this net disposable income? Because that's what is happening. I think the minister is at a loss. He keeps taking money from people that no longer have anything at all. So it means there's something missing somewhere. I don't know what economists call it, but there's something missing somewhere. I think there's supposed to be some sort of balance. And the minister is really, really struggling. I think it's really at his wit's end. Because yes, government has to collect taxes. But I think then there's a problem there. Because you're collecting taxes from me. And again, for me, the issue of taxes is a very sore point. Because when you're looking at it from a feminist point of view, a lot of the women are in the informal sector, right? And I know a couple of months ago, Zimra was on a serious rampage. They were going to the salons. sitting there looking at the ladies who do our nails, who do our hair, how much money they make a day, so that they can decide how much to tax them. So you see, the minister is desperate to get money, and we're okay with that. But we're saying the problem is, where is that money going? Because I don't mind being taxed whatever it is, but we need to know where is the money going, how is the money being used.
All right, thank you, Buhle. Very useful intervention there. Kudzi, you're not going to have it as easy as Ranga and Buhle have had. I'm going to ask you, because you are also, you're deep in politics and you understand this better than we do. How much of succession politics is going to play in the economy? Our viewers would want to know.
Okay, thank you, Mr. T. Okay, before I answer your question, I think I want to clarify that it seems as if the economy is quite chaotic and the whole issue is structural, where the government is doing everything in the economy, whether it's in agriculture, they are funding agriculture. When you go to energy, they want to be the ones producing power. Yet you can put incentives, you can put policies that will end up attracting the private sector, and they should be doing that. When it comes to succession politics, we have already seen some slogans now. We don't know how they're going to culminate. We don't even know the horses in the race. So it's quite murky. I believe 2025 is going to be better. 2026, that's when we're going to see the effects of succession politics. Obviously, it's going to disrupt the economy because a lot of sloganeering, a lot of populism, and once politicians are in their contest, nothing really goes on. No one is focusing on delivery. Everyone is focusing on getting power. That's a risk that we face now. I'm not sure how it's going to go, but it's something that we should watch out.
Well, we're going to be inviting you as often as possible. You've got a better, sit at the table, so you understand this better. But coming to the Reserve Bank, the central bank, when you look at the central bank, what do you think is going to happen in 2025? What are your thoughts there? Do you think that John II has the mantle to control money supply and to make the country better?
I think it all depends on the government. So far, we saw this year when there was an explosion in the ZiG when it was devaluated. If you can trace it, you find that it was due to the CITIC summit expenditure there. It contributed to the whole devaluation of the ZiG. That's a fact that was not admitted in public, but we know that was the source of the devaluation. We see now the government was struggling to pay their civil servants in ZiG. They were struggling there, and they kept the tap closed, as it were. Otherwise, they had a choice to print the money, and we're going to see inflation. So as much as John II has all the power, he's the governor, the results depends on the government's behavior. If the government is going to behave in terms of expenditure, his job is going to be easy and we're going to see stability. But I believe politically, there is no will to devalue again. People were quite angry when the ZiG was devaluated last time. I don't think they're eager to see the anger again. So we expect discipline in 2025 and stability for the ZiG. I'm quite hopeful on that one.
Well, thank you very much for the optimism. Brains, you disappeared, but let's hear more from you. What are your thoughts on 2025? Are we going to see more taxes and more regulation, and what would you like to see? Brains, is he still there? Okay.
But it's frozen.
It's frozen. Okay. All right. I suppose, Janet, you can come in. What would you like to see in 2025?
Yes, thank you, Tinashe. What I would like to see, and I want to come in because my colleagues have really covered the other areas. I'll come back on the debt issue. and link it with what Woodley spoke about in terms of transparency and accountability. I think there has been a lot of indiscipline within our debt management frameworks in terms of government publicly guaranteed debts. There's really been indiscipline in terms of really the instruments that have been used in terms of bailouts. So I think we really need to move towards debt transparency and actually accountability, and where the Public Debt Management Office really does its work. We need to push for regular debt sustainability analysis. I think this is one big issue that probably our annual debt bulletin should be looking at in terms of really sharing on the debt sustainability levels, because right now we are way beyond our thresholds in terms of our constitution, in terms of our Public Debt Act, in terms of even the SADC protocol that has got the thresholds that we have to meet. I think there's so much indiscipline there that we need to deal with, and probably for the government to really come out strong on that aspect. There's also the issue, of course, of the high-level debt dialogue platform that was created in terms of, is it a platform that we're continuing to use? If we are, how are we doing in terms of the reforms that the government itself actually created in terms of this is what we're going to do when it comes to economic reforms? We're going to deal with the forex issue. We're going to deal with issues around fiscal discipline, remove quasi-fiscal activities of the RBZ. All those reforms, we need to be looking at them. The governance reforms themselves, they really bring a very strong component. Before we even talk about our human rights context, they speak to issues around accountability and dealing with corruption and really building, once again, institutions of oversight. How are we going to deal with that as reforms that we need to do? And in 2025, it may be good to really go deep into those reforms. The other one is around the land reform. I think quite a number are dealing with that issue, especially from the creditor side in terms of the government meeting its obligations. So I think it's about discipline, which to me is the deficit when I'm looking at it. It could be from all the other sectors that colleagues have shared, but also from the debt perspective. Because if we are going to move this needle, it's going to take discipline. It's going to take discipline in implementing the reforms that we are talking about. Within that same space, because it's very difficult as well, the reforms that we are talking about, is also to see in terms of the resources being allocated to the social, in terms of the social impact measures, in terms of making sure that we address the challenges that the citizens are currently facing. I know within that space they've been talking about a wage staff monitored program that really caters for the social services like education, climate change impacts, and quite enough. I think there are about 5 areas that they've said would need social investments in. How are we going to fund those? How are we going to, what kind of partnerships are we going to get into those to ensure that the citizens are cushioned in the informal sector, relieve the burden of care on women and girls? All those issues are really critical with where we are going. My hope in 2025 was to see how we also broaden the domestic investor base. I think we talk a lot about the foreign direct investment, but what is it that we can do in terms of broadening our domestic investor base? Quite a number of various taxes have been introduced, but how are they limiting in terms of our growth, in terms of citizens playing a part as well within the economy? I think it's really, really a big issue. I'm looking forward in 2025, Tinashe, on the legal reform aspects. The issue of the Public Finance Management Act amendment is on the legislative agenda for the 10th Parliament. I think we really need to make sure that we have concluded on that issue of the Public Finance Management Act, of the Public Debt the Act, in terms of their amendments, in ensuring that there is oversight, there is discipline, there is improved debt reporting and transparency, and also building the capacity our government, especially the Public Debt Management Office, in terms of enhancing its capacity in managing, reporting debts and all those issues. So I think there is really a lot, but it falls on the feet of the government in terms of the discipline that we need to see and the reforms that we need to really engage with for us to be able to get into meaningful dialogue with our creditors, for us to get into meaningful dialogue with our industry, to get into meaningful dialogue in terms of how we can deal with our domestic debt issue, which is increasing, I would say, at a rate that is not healthy, and that has led us to where we are in terms of the unsustainable debt ratios that we currently have. So I think I'll be working out in terms of the discipline and engagement and the transparency that has to come with that.
All right.
Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you very much, everybody. I don't know if Brains, you can hear us. Brains, Mugutinzwere, Bambo.
I can hear you, Tinashe. I think there's a lot of sabotage there's some sabotage that is happening, because the moment you call my name, the frogs around here are just cutting off the network. So I think there's a problem.
All right.
Maybe it's what you're smoking.
Yeah, I've actually cut it out, so I think now it's going to be okay.
All right, okay. So for you, Brains, maybe the question to you is just a simple and straightforward one. What do we need to do as business going into 2025?
I think what we need to do, we need to manage costs, Tinashe. 2025 is going to be very difficult from a cost management perspective. Number one, you find a lot of these companies have linked their costs to the exchange rate, and that is going to prove to be very difficult next year, because I expect steep movement in the ZiG exchange rate at a time where the ZiG will not be available in the market. I expect as well that the Reserve Bank is going to be very aggressive in trying to mop up the excess liquidity. Understand that the budget is the minister is expecting to increase revenue collection by 145% thereabout. But when you look at the mathematics, it doesn't seem to be right. You see, you can't expect to increase your revenues to 7 billion, to increase by 145% to 7 billion. Somehow, something is very wrong there. So what I expect, therefore, is that there will be a lot of money supply that will be coming into the market, and the Reserve Bank is going to be overly aggressive. And what it means, therefore, is that the banks will find it very difficult in the market to maintain low interest rates. So those that are borrowing expect that the interest rates are going to be quite steep, and expect as well that the banks are going to be calling on their low maturing facilities. I expect a lot of banks to start cutting back on lending next year. And on the other hand, look, I don't expect a lot of change on the disposable income perspective. And in as much as the government is expecting to bring in a lot of people into the tax net, I still believe and expect that the informal sector is too clever for the government. You see, the people that you find in the informal sector are not your ordinary people out there. These are look, what would I say? For example, you find executives, those that used to be executives, ex-bankers, ex-what, engineers, and so on. Those are the guys that are running the informal sector. So the informal sector, these are very clever people. And when you look at the informal sector in Zimbabwe, Tinashe, you will discover that it's not necessarily an informal sector that is sitting on its own. It's an informal sector that is being fed by the formal sector. When you look at the commodities market, for example, most of the goods that you find in the informal sector are coming from the formal sector. So it's not an informal sector that is standing on its own and the formal sector that is on the other side. It's just an informal sector that has decided to probably avoid, the traditional channels of making goods to the market. So because of that, we don't expect that the government is going to collect as much revenue as it expects, and therefore, you expect that the expenditures in the market are going to remain quite constrained unless the government prints money. And when it prints money, it becomes a tax. And that tax definitely will devalue, earnings for businesses. So it's going to be a very difficult year. What I would expect is for the government to actually, look, I don't understand this business of the government every time expecting a higher budget. This year is 110, you expect the next year to be 270. I would love one day, Tinashe, to experience or to actually listen to a budget statement where the minister is saying, last year I collected 110 billion. Next year I expect to collect $110 billion. That is the only way we will manage money supply. When you look at how money supply has been growing, especially the ZIG money supply, it's astonishing. You see, it's quite astonishing, and at that rate, you don't expect us to manage inflation. We can manage it on paper, but you can't manage the exchange rate. So next year is definitely going to be a slightly difficult year on account of the money supply that is going to be pouring in the market emanating from the government, unless the government decides to say, okay, we'll only spend that which we would have collected. Because the problem with the budget is that once the government has approved the budgets, the expenditures for these ministries, they start expending. Sometimes they start borrowing from the market, or no one knows. Maybe they start printing as well, because once you approve an expenditure for 210 billion from 110 billion, look, it's already inflationary. So I expect that the market will remain difficult for next year, and businesses should understand that the only way to survive is to manage costs. Managing costs, reducing borrowing levels, to the gearing levels. Going forward, you expect banks will be calling up on all loans that are maturing. I don't expect most of these banks to be actually rolling over facilities, because as we speak right now, there's a serious liquidity crunch in the market. And even if I was a banker, really, I wouldn't really be rolling over facilities, because there's quite a crunch that is in the market. And the Reserve Bank, unfortunately, because it will be trying to clean the fiscal mess, it then steps up, in terms of mopping up excess liquidity, and in the process issuing more NNCDs and so on. And it's the banks that suffer, and when the banks suffer, they pass on the cost to the general economy. The frogs have not been listening.
Tinashe, you're not on mute, so we couldn't hear you.
Tinashe, you're on mute, yeah? Can anyone hear Tinashe, or is me alone?
Can you hear me now?
No, we can't hear Tinashe. Yes.
Is it clear now?
I can't hear you, Mike.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, all right. Okay, I was just saying thank you very much for giving us your views on 2024 and 2025. That was very useful, and I think our audience really benefit from that analysis and thoughts. Thank you very much, and I hope that you join us again every Friday. And just for the purposes of Friday drinks, you need to be drinking something on a Friday. So we need to see you drinking something. So that's for next time. Otherwise, have yourself a wonderful weekend. Cheers. We'll come back to the studio, and I'll ask Shumba and Zia what they think. Just a summary of everything that we've had. We'll start with you, Shumba. What are your thoughts? Mazinzo.
Well, first I want to give credit to Sue's Bakery and Delicatessens for giving us a cheese board, which has a lovely variety of cheeses. So thank you so much, Sue.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
So, yeah, look, I think, I'm an internal optimist. So there are a lot of headwinds going into next year. We don't know what the rainy season is going to be like. I've heard reporting that we might have a drought for a second consecutive year, which would be quite bad for us. We have all these headwinds, which a lot of, which your panel spoke to. The debt is a challenge. Taxation is a challenge. Government expenditure is a challenge. And, I appreciate and understand those headwinds. But I'm of the school of thought that necessity is the mother of invention, right? So when you're in trouble, when you hit rock bottom, you're actually more likely to pivot and do things differently. And I think that that's where we are as a country, and certainly government of Zimbabwe in terms
of...
So
what's the tailwind?
So the tailwind is this hardship, that we have a drought, that the books aren't balancing for government of Zimbabwe.
So the headwind turns into a tailwind?
Yes, because if they continue, they're just going to go bust.
Okay.
And it's going to be a rewind of 2008. empty supermarket shelves.
So if I get you correctly, you're just saying that we're about to reset.
That's my sense.
We should prepare for it.
Absolutely.
You think it's going to happen in 2025?
Oh, yeah.
Zia.
Okay.
What are your thoughts?
Well, things will get worse. So I always want to separate between what I wish for and what's likely to happen by just looking at the data. So I'm wishing for all the positives that maybe some of our panelists have spoken about, and there is and what Shumba is talking about, that maybe necessity is the mother of all invention. But the reality, the way I see it, is things will actually get worse. We already have got indications or pointers of how life is going to be in 2025. Aggressive tax collection methods. So they are going after cross-border buses. They're going after professional groups. They're going after churches. They're pretty much going after everyone. I think that just tells you the mindset. You are not seeing any signals around maybe trying to grow the economy, trying to grow the cake, but there's that aggressiveness. What happens if all those efforts have failed to yield the outcome that they are looking for? So they don't get as much money from the churches, from the buses, from the professionals. What's next?
I'll push back a little bit.
No. Let me finish. You have articulated your point. I'm sure the audience will then maybe just tell us what they think. So I'm actually expecting things to actually get worse in 2025. Everything that you are seeing today, which is not looking good, I think when you're in 2025 around this time, you look back at 25 and like, geez, it was much better then.
So I tend to agree with everything that you've said, by the way. So where I want to push back is that, in principle, right, I think that, so we have this, and you're the lawyer amongst us, right? We have these laws on the books. We have these statutes, rules and regulations. And they dictate how we behave, the three of us, because we're engaged in the formal sector, right? We run businesses that pay VAT, that pay payroll taxes, that pay corporate tax. And I suspect that's true for a lot of our viewers, right? They are in the formal sector, and that's how they do business. And I actually think that one of the reasons why we've seen the informal sector take market share from the formal sector is because they've been able to get away with running a business, right? Actually building, because these tuck shops, right? They're not shacks, right? Some of them are actually quite impressive in terms of the structure, right? You can see that meaningful amount of capital has been deployed in building this thing that's a tuck shop, and they're selling stuff. And they're not paying VAT. They're not paying any of these taxes. They are not licensed in any way, right? So they're going to do better than an OK, a Spar, a Pick and Pay, okay? And I think that it's fantastic that the state has decided that these guys can't get a free ride. They need to come to the party just like we do, right? And the state actually has the machinery to police them, to say, listen, where's your VAT registration? Where's your payroll registration? Where's your license for X and Y and Z that Ranga and Tinashe and their respective businesses have? Right. So I don't think it's a bad thing. I don't think it's the government overreaching and overtaxing. I think it's fantastic for the formal sector that the state is saying to the informal sector, actually, the rules that apply to the formal sector, the law that applies to the formal sector, applies to you guys as well.
Well, there you heard it. Truly is on the right path, going after the church mouse. But interesting discussions. This has been our longest session. I thought Comrade Kasukuwere had a lot to say. No.
Yeah, we should have him again, for sure.
We should, eh?
And we should have Ambassador again.
For the same panel?
Yeah, that'll be fun, I think. That'll be very good fun.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. I think we've covered most of what we needed to cover for 2024 and going into next year. And I think Saviour Kasukuwere gave us a glimpse of what actually happens in cabinet, and I think that's why we do it. That the reason why we do it is because a lot of us as business people are not aware of what actually happens, the dynamics that actually happen in government or in cabinet, and how decisions are made. So it's always very useful when these guys can share their time and share their thoughts and be open about it. So let's support them and let's make sure that they actually open up a whole lot more, because we're the only, that's how we benefit from the discussions. So otherwise, we're going to have a lovely Friday and weekend. I'm looking forward to it, and have yourself a wonderful weekend. Cheers.
Cheers.
Ciao.